Welcome to season 2 of our Bumped Into. This week, I had the absolute pleasure of bumping into Sharon Ogwang. Sharon Ogwang is a published author. Her book, An Image in a Mirror, shot its way up into the top 10 list at Exclusive Books when it launched. She describes herself as a polymath. I actually had to Google that word a couple of times to really understand it. What is a polymath?
According to Wikipedia, a polymath is an individual whose knowledge spans a significant number of subjects, known to draw on complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems.
One of Sharon's convictions is having strong beliefs, but holding on to them loosely. So in this episode, I push the boundaries a little bit. First of all, being a Christian, I ask her about religion in Africa. Why is she Christian when it's not the religion of our forefathers, especially for someone who's passionate about Africa?
It's a contentious one, naturally. And I think the thing for me is, number one, and although I haven't done the research, I do believe that the God who Christians we pray to was already...
I also ask her about being a tweet activist or couch activist, or however you want to call it. We love to change our profile picture, tweet X, Y, and Z is happening in a certain country. However, I always question whether this has any impact.
So, I mean, the last couch activism I was part of is, I don't know if you remember, where people were changing their profile pictures.
To blue, right?
Yeah, to blue, in solidarity with the Sudan and the genocide that's happening there. And I mean, in that moment, I was thinking, it's great in the sense of the consciousness it creates amongst peers, and that we're having conversations we wouldn't ordinarily have.
Okay. I also ask her what frustrates her the most about Africans.
Wow. What frustrates me the most? It's so contentious. My response, I think our disregard.
And as always, in true I Bumped Into style, we go deep. What limiting belief do you have right now?
This is therapy. What limiting belief do I have right now? I do think, although it's a belief I'm trying to unlearn, I do sometimes find
Testing. Yeah, we are here. Jeez. It's exciting. Okay, no, so thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just kicking straight into it. This is weird, but anyways, yeah, thank you for actually coming on the show. It's been a long time coming. You're a very hard woman to actually get hold of, but thank you for joining me. It's my first video recording, so might just be a bit nervous, but I was made for the camera.
That's all you need to remember. When the nerves kick in, just channel that other side of you.
Yeah. So anyways, Shaz, okay, let's get straight into it. I don't want to waste too much of your time because I know you're a very busy woman. Many people to see since you're in Joburg. Welcome to our Bumped Into.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just generally, I did brief you before that, look, we're just going to have a conversation and feel comfortable to say what you need to say. It's your truth at the end of the day. Yeah, day. Anyways, let us kick off. So, for the people that don't know you, kindly introduce yourself. Who is Sharon Ogwang?
Yeah. It's so weird, and I don't know if you feel this way too, but that question
Yeah.
never gets easier to answer,
As
because
you grow
immediately your
older.
mind is like, which part should I tell them? So I'll try take a stab at it. Sharon Ogwang is a writer. She sees the world in stories. I don't know why I'm talking about myself in third person, but it's fine.
It's fine. I mean, you don't. Narcissistic people do that, but hey.
So she sees the world in stories. She's a novelist who recently published her first novel, which is fantastic. She is very passionate about Africa's development. Very interested in business models and startups, and yeah, that's a lot of who I am. Yeah.
In terms of how white children from your observation as well, right? I mean, you're not speaking the gospel truth. It's from your experience. Just to set, what do they call this now? English is escaping me. Disclaimer.
Yes, that's the word.
How do I ask this question? How we're brought up. White children versus black children, right? And let me not say pick on things, but pick on one thing you like about how white children were brought up. And yeah, let's focus on white people. What's the one thing you like about the way they were brought up? And then what's the one thing you don't like about the way they were brought up?
So the one thing I like is probably the freedom to self-discover, the freedom to explore and get things wrong, which I must put also a disclaimer in that I do think it's the reality of living with parents who are further up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that the way you raise your kids changes. I think a lot of the one thing I don't like about the way they were raised, and I guess my interpretation of some of them, is the far less conscious, far less empathetic, in my opinion. And this could be privileged white people that I've interacted with and not necessarily across the board. So that's the disclaimer there. And I guess the inverse for black kids, I think, again, being lower in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I do think sometimes you raise your kids largely from fear. So there's a lot of, because I've seen what the world can do to someone, I'm trying to save you. So there's a fear of you misstepping what I believe is the right path. So your self-discovery needs to be on my terms, because I know this is the only way to save you from a world that's harsh, right? So that's the one thing that I don't necessarily like. I think the one thing that I do like, and which sounds cliche, but I think is incredibly profound, is the deep sense of respect, pride, and community. So the idea of, even as a kid, you remember having so many people in your home, and for a curious kid, learning these people and these people informing a lot of the way I navigate the world, and my curiosity about people, and like my ability to weave things together, and adaptability and all those things, which I think was a phenomenal gift to be given as a kid. You just took me deep. Needing to just
10 minutes in, we're there. We're here now,
What's happening?
Okay, so no, thank you for that. It's quite insightful, and I do agree with you on some points, but in light of time, we can move on, and we can save that for, hopefully, if you'll grace me again with another interview. So you said we can't really cover everything, so we'll speak about Africa. I'd like to start there, because I know it's something that you're currently investing in as well right now. First question, right? Why? It might sound like a stupid question.
Yeah.
But just go with me here. Why Africa? And not SA or Eastern Cape or Butterworth, which is where you're from.
Yeah.
Why Africa?
And I mean, I'll take the scenic route to answer this if you don't mind, but it's been so fascinating visiting African countries. I remember being in Kenya quite distinctively, where I've been there twice. Of course, Uganda, because my parents are from there, being in Mozambique. But in these different regions, feeling a sense of home. Like, and yes, South Africa is where my lived memories are, and therefore it's a deep part of that home story. But feeling this consistency of connection to the different countries that make up this continent, but also broadly feeling very strongly about the injustices that have been done to the continent more broadly, and not just countries in isolation, and the need to be part of the building story and part of the alternative narrative story for the generations after me.
Okay.
And this is of course understanding that, like, I hope to have impact on a number of African countries, but also understanding that I probably won't reach all 54.
No, it's good to dream. You are a big dreamer, and look at you, your dreams are manifesting. And okay, so the reason why I asked this is it's something I also asked my previous guest, Refilwe. with regards to, you know, the narrative, we've spoken about this a couple of times, with regards to just Africa. Africa has 54 countries, depending on which site you go on, which ones are recognized, 54 countries, I think over 1,600 languages, many, many cultures as well, like, whomst are you to think, you can, and to change that, do you know what I mean? That's why I was like, why not South Africa? Why not Eastern Cape, where it's more relatable? Because I find that in Africa, we face different challenges, depending on which region you go in. And within the region, then the different countries have different challenges. So how do you, this is just a more roundabout way, but is it even possible, because when I look at the history of people trying to be change makers, right? I'm still yet, maybe someone will correct me, I'm still yet to see someone saying, I want to fix North America, or I want to fix South America, Asia, Martin Luther King, I want to fix America. Nelson Mandela, I want to free South Africa, Mahatma Gandhi was, is it India? It was India, so you get where I'm going with this. So it's almost like, is it even possible, or is it just cute to say?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll give you the cute answer and then the more practical
Okay.
answer. So the cute one is, I do fully believe in the idea that I would rather live with the audacious dream to stretch me than live with the attainable dream. So saying South Africa for me feels attainable, but saying I want to impact the entire continent feels unattainable, which stretches just my comfort. You know what I mean? So keeps on pushing me in my personal growth, but also in the things I seek to do, So that's just the tension that I think is useful to keep you reaching, reaching.
So would you say maybe a consequence of you trying to fix Africa is that South Africa will be fixed in the journey?
I'll contribute to fixing it.
Okay.
And I think that's where I guess I can distill the practicalities is I don't see myself necessarily being a Martin or a Mandela unless life takes me in that direction. But I see myself being some of the forces behind a lot of the great movements on the continent.
Okay.
So the thinkers that are informing a lot of the work that the policymakers are running with, the creators who are creating a startup and saying, actually, it's not mine to run. It's in Nigeria. We're two incredible co-founders that are complementary. Let's get them in here. Let them run it. So it's more the thinking DNA of this continent is what I want to contribute to it. But the faces that you'll see in the forefront may not necessarily be mine. And that feels attainable. So it feels attainable to, for example, with my development studies masters now that I'm going to do in September.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But doing a comparative study on 4 countries, one in each region, and having practical insights that I hope to then give to firms, to development firms, and say, hey, here's what I've come up with. Here's the paper. And how do we use it? How is it useful, in Nigeria? How's it useful in South Africa? How's it useful in Kenya? And how's it useful in Algeria? And how do we learn how to tweak a Nigeria versus a Ghana who are in the same region, or a Kenya versus a Rwanda, And I think in as much as there is, I'm now in a monologue, but you get me started on this topic and it's great.
But that's why I'm speaking about Africa, right? That's why we are, yeah.
And as much as I am fully one of those who speaks to this idea of, I sometimes struggle with the concept of Africa versus the distinct countries. But I also think what shouldn't get lost in translation is the ideas and solutions that can be leveraged that already exist in different. So yes, you may need to tweak how we think about sustainable housing for the poor in Nigeria versus in South Africa. Sure. But I think
some principles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we've lost. There's so many questions that South Africa has answered that when I go back to Uganda, I'm like, but how aren't we just taking that and saying, hey, how do we tweak it? How do we find financing? And how do we run with that?
So just on that, what do you think is the issue then? It's because the way you're talking about it, it reminds me of corporate, where you're in the same company, but people are working in silos.
Yeah.
We're on the same continent.
Yeah.
I've sold for eggs. Dude, don't reinvent the wheel. Just take what I've done and implement it, or tweak it, as you say. So what do you think where's the disconnect happening in the...
I think the disconnect is people. It comes down to us. It comes down to us, and that I do think a lot is happening in silos on the continent, and a lot of incredible things are happening. And I continue to fully believe that we hear a lot more about the tragedies than we do about actually good work that's happening in little impact investing circles, and little VC circles, and little development agency circles. There is actually like a school's there. Sure. It wasn't there the day before, and it's there, and like kids are learning from iPads and whatever. So I think the problem is us, man. Yeah.
Okay, because I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how we have friends, we know people, we've seen organizations. I mean, I can't name them right now, but young people trying to change Africa and trying to change their countries, And maybe I should look at the stats, because I don't want to be quoted on something that I don't have the full facts on, But we have all these conferences, we clap and we get excited. We're going to do it. Yeah, But nothing, I don't know, maybe it's just from my observation, but nothing seems to really move forward from an African point of view. I know there's small pockets of successes like Rwanda. I mean, I always don't like to say it's the new Silicon Valley, but it's up and coming, and people don't want to talk about that, but from just a general African context, okay, I need to get back on that. I don't want to actually data or level arguments, and it's just my opinion from my observation. I may be wrong, because you might see the GDP of Africa has actually increased, which again is, so I'm just going on a tangent here. Anyways, back to you, because it's about you. So I'm still just thinking about what you were saying. Anyways, Sharon, you can see how my voice went down. You're waiting for the punchline.
Going down.
What's your dream for Africa?
That's a great question. My very audacious dream is a Singapore story.
Okay, what is the Singapore
and what
story?
that means is seeing Africa one day developed. And when I say Africa, again, I want to go to the 54 countries, but seeing majority of the countries on the continent developed with thriving economies, with opportunities for young Ugandan kids, for young Rwandanese, Kenyan? Okay, let's go for Kenyan. Sorry, guys. All my homies from Rwanda, sorry. But for young Kenyan kids, or for young, kids from Mali. So for them to exist in a world where they feel like there's opportunities for them to thrive, where the economy is growing, where the country works, is my dream. And I think a part of that dream is also great governance. So I can't wait for the day where we see very intentional leaders who are full of integrity leading our countries. And it may be a romantic notion in that the fallibility of humanity, so we're not perfect. I'm not saying perfect, but leaders who seem to be making decisions that consider their people quite deeply in their decision making. And does that mean there'll be no corruption? Absolutely not. Here, all my disclaimers coming out.
Well, hey.
I'm reading your mind.
Yeah. I was about to say, give me a leader, a leader, whether they dead or alive, that you would like to see African leaders emulate.
Cool. And I'll actually give you an African leader who is not alive, Thomas Sankara, who was the president of Burkina Faso, which actually means a country of upright people. And he named it that during his reign. It was called something else before. It just slips my memory right now. But that's what it means, a country of upright people. And during his reign, I mean, the stats also slip my mind right now. But for example, literacy rate skyrocketed. the economy skyrocketed. The idea of almost what you call, not isolated, I want to say like almost economies that exist separate from the main metro. So almost having very thriving economies in Iduchwa or Butterworth that is separate from the big metros, which are Joburg, Cape Town, and the rest. But in his reign, that's what he focused on. So this idea of creating remote economies and the idea of giving the people the tools they need to create economies in their own sphere. So in a lot of the villages as well, there were different kind of business models that came up during his reign.
Okay.
There was also a big drive towards active citizenry and also this big drive in how he made himself accessible to the people and how he led by example. So even in terms of the fleet of cars that parliament members had during his reign were cut. So many spending habits. The textile industry thrived during his time where he had all the cabinet. They could only use their allowance for clothing, etc. on local clothing manufacturers and so much more. Because I started reading his biography, but I haven't finished it. But absolutely exceptional. Like, he sounds like the kind of leader you want to be.
I've watched his documentary.
Yeah, please send it to me. I need to see that.
It was very surprising. I'm like, because the stories we fed about Africa, like, this happened in my continent. However, I'd like to ask you, what happened to him?
Assassinated.
Okay. And the more you read, why was he assassinated?
Because of what he stood for and what he was capable of doing for the continent of Africa, and because he wouldn't cower to the powers of the West.
And you look at, okay.
All of them. all the hope was assassinated.
And you know me, I'm a very optimistic person, but then it's almost like people with these ideals, right? You have these ideals and how you envision a country or a continent to be. However, the powers that be, which, depending on what you read as well, we know where the power lies. It's not gonna happen on their watch, you know? So basically my question is it even possible? Is it possible with the current system we're living in, you know, and where the power sits? Not to start conspiracies, but we do know certain countries where
say it.
No.
Say it. Say it.
If things are not going their way, they will create a war.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think people need democracy there, you know?
So, I think they don't respect human rights.
So, you know? Actually, which makes, you know what, let's... Again, you know, let's play with this idea. Africa. Was Africa ready for capitalism? Was Africa ready to open up to the world?
It's an incredible question and a hard question. Because I think and I'll roundabout try and answer it, but I think the hard thing for me when I think about industry and how industries were built in the States, which was on the back of slaves, which were largely African slaves, is by the time Africa had adopted capitalism, the strength of industries that were created in the States and other countries was so strong that you're not existing in an equal playing field, in that the cheap labor or labor at no cost even that was available at the time those industries were created, and so many other dynamics that made it easy to create too big to fail. So how do we then, so now we come into the classroom and we're kind of, okay, now capitalism is kind of the model of the economy that we're using, but it's just, it feels like we don't have the tools to create industries of the same depth because you have saturated markets, currencies are pegged on the system. The system is structured so meticulously that it's I don't think it's a matter of we weren't ready, but I think the system and the way it's created was created in a way to give certain nations the upper hand in thriving in a capitalist world. Right now, I can't think of an alternative to it because of where we are as a world. And I don't know how socialism would have played out as well. So it's a hard one.
Just on that, and thank you for that answer. I think it's a conversation we still need to. Sorry, where I'm coming from is I just read Hlumelo Biko's book, Africa Reimagined.
And what does he think about?
No, look, it's something also a good friend of mine who's also my manager as well. He speaks about as long as we're playing in this system, we're always going to be behind. The system was not created by us. So, which actually brings me to my next question to say, if America had time to actually adjust to this, and this is something even Biko speaks of, right? Where he says, look, lost my train of thought. We'll be back.
Hi, hello.
Okay, cool. Picking up. So, what I was saying is, Biko was speaking about how we bought into this system, right? And as Africa, since we're so behind, we're always playing catch up, right? So do you think we'll ever actually catch up as long as we playing into capitalism and it's not on our own terms, right?
Yeah. I mean, given some of the points I raised earlier, I don't think so, purely because I do fundamentally believe that by design, it's designed with predetermined winners. And Africa wasn't at the table when capitalism was designed, and just so many intricacies in the system and the way it works that just don't put us in a position to win. And I mean, similar to India, if you think about India's cheap labor that's powering Silicon Valley. and arguably you argue that those Indian people who wouldn't have jobs and can feed their families, which in no way am I saying that that's light or something to make light of, but it's the power dynamic will always look a certain way. And that's why it's like, let's set up call centers and just have peeps in India and in the rest of Africa be very low skilled labor that powers capitalist economies, right? The bigger economies, which are the bigger players who decided how the system works and had years and years of slave labor to build the system.
I just have a thought in my mind, actually. Me being pessimistic, I actually do think one day, maybe we won't be around. Don't think we'll be around. But it can change, because when you look at history, so I used to hate history, by the way, in high school. It's so funny how the universe is like, back on you, I'm not so. But anyways, yeah. I've been studying like a lot of history, and if you look at how there've always been power changes, it happens all the time, right? So there were the Mayans, there were the Roman empires, the Ottoman Empire, now the West. Which I think now they're still trying to hold on to power, but China's up and coming as well. It's almost like a cycle. And actually, now that I've reading Biko's book, I also realized that Africa also used to, as much as we used to be like reading about Mali, the great kings of Mali and the things they were doing there, which is never spoken about.
That's the problem as well.
So in actually saying that, I do think one day, especially with where Africa is in terms of in the next few years, we're going to have the youngest population, and what things. I think it will change. Power always changes. Empires rise and then they fall. So I do have hope. Yeah. Maybe not Africa, but there will be a new powerhouse, which right now seems like it's going to be China. But hopefully one day our turn will come, and our great grandkids will get to benefit from that. Okay. Something we spoke about recently. What are your thoughts on, still on the topic of Africa, and just activism, right? What are your thoughts on couch activists, as I like to call them, more tweet activists, and a word you like to use is cute. It's cute to tweet, but on a serious note, like it's cute to tweet about Rwanda and the things that are happening there, or Sudan, what are your views on that, and what has it always been like that? Where people are like, we feel for them and, support, but deep down, I need to just eat tomorrow. Don't really care about. Yeah, I don't want to say care, but what are your view on that?
So, I mean, the last couch activism I was part of is, I don't know if you remember, where people were changing their profile pictures
to blue, right?
Yeah, to blue, in solidarity with the Sudan and the genocide that's happening there. And I mean, in that moment, I was thinking it's great in the sense of the consciousness it creates amongst peers, and that we're having conversations we wouldn't ordinarily have in peer groups. So it's like, why is everyone's thing blue? And then you have this conversation and people are aware of it, but does it change the people's lives on the ground? I'm not sure. Do the right people who have the power to do like aid relief groups or different development agencies move because we've made our profile pictures blue?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's not harmful, and that's why I'm not anti-couch activism, because it's not doing any bad. If anything, it's sparking conversations amongst peers who wouldn't ordinarily have those conversations. But there's no overt negative impact that I think it's having. I think the people who are in positions who would want to make active change are doing it anyway, and the people who are sitting just tweeting wouldn't anyway. So I don't think it's relinquishing people who are already proactive and making change to stop making change. I think it's just conscientizing a generation and making them more aware of what's happening in the world. So it's not doing any harm. So I have no problem with it. I think when we think it's doing more than it is doing, then I have a problem with it, because then I'm just like, nah, guys. I mean, it's doing good in that we're talking about this stuff, but is it saving that mother's life in Sudan?
And you know what, I can appreciate that answer. I haven't really, hence why I'm here to learn from you, you know. I haven't really thought about, I mean, the way you answered it that way, you know. And the way I always like to think of analogies, right? So why I was asking the question, it's similar to when a close family member dies or whatever, or you go to a funeral, you know, and then you start to realize the value of life. Yeah. And then at the funeral, you start to have these conversations like, what am I doing with my life? But then 2 weeks later, you're back in the habit of doing things, you know, meaning, do we need to have that conversation?
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking, but you know what, I can appreciate your answer. It's about just starting the conversation and then hopefully find someone to be a change agent within, you know, the conversations we have. Again, something we spoke about recently, which I enjoyed. So I'd love for you to expand on it in terms of your views about brain drain, and more specifically, brain drain from Africa, obviously, but more specifically on people that leave Africa, that go to Europe. You see, yes. To and America or wherever they go, but then they speak about Africa and speak about changing Africa, but they're not even here, you know.
Yeah.
First question, what do you say about those people, and do they have an equal voice versus people that are here in Africa doing things? I don't know if it's a fair question, but you know.
I'll try to answer it, but it's a hard question. Interestingly enough, today I was having a conversation with one of my direct managers, because I happen to have two. So she was saying that it's worth questioning whether the greatest impact I can make is by being physically on the continent versus being at a decision-making headquarter in New York of the UN. And she was kind of posing that to me based on my idea of, I want to come back home eventually and kind of work on the ground. And she was like, you need to deliberately, beyond emotional attachment to home, think about, does a different geography in terms of the power that's available to you there, assuming you're occupying like a senior seat in that organization, can you change the continent more by being there than being here? Which, I mean, is a grapple that I, to be honest, are constantly grappling with. But when you, for example, hear certain thought leaders who aren't here say something, there is also the danger of, I think, theoretically being able to say the right things, but a detachment from the emotional toil of living in a place and grappling with its problems on the ground, which sometimes I think is incredibly useful, versus maybe sitting in an aircon office in New York and solving problems in wherever on the continent. So I think I struggle with the idea that it's one or the other. I think there's room
Yeah,
for
and
both
I was
voices
about to
at
say
this
that,
point.
I
Yeah.
think as people, it's politics as well. We like to make things very binary, it's either this or that, I think to your point, maybe that's why you also grapple with it, is they both play a role.
Yeah.
And it's not to say the one is more important than the other. I think if you're in New York, in the air-conditioned office, looking over the Empire State, well, do what you can do, because you are closer to the people in power as well. But also, if you're on the ground, I guess you would get your hands dirty. It's more about being strategic and operational as well. Everyone has a role to play. So I also grapple with that, Yeah, okay. No, fair enough. I can dig it. Just speaking, whilst we're on Africa, religion in Africa.
There's a contentious stuff coming up now.
Yeah, it's again, I'm influenced nowadays by read Steve Biko's book, still Christian, by the way, disclaimer, but obviously I have my questions, and you can see where I'm going with this in terms of Biko, and also when you do study history, Christianity is not really our religion, right? It came with the missionaries, and maybe someone else can prove me wrong, because history seems to always change sometimes. But what is your view about us being, I don't know the stats, but we are the biggest believers now in Christianity. Well, there's a huge, yeah. I was recently in Netherlands where there are churches, and it came from the West, right? But the churches are now aesthetics. It's nice to look at and take pictures, but no one is actually in there. But we are still preaching what they came here with, So, yeah, what is your view? And why I ask that is because there's a quote that you always say to me, in terms of having strong opinions, but holding on to them loosely. I'm paraphrasing right now. So, yeah.
It's a contentious one, naturally. And I think the thing for me is, number one, and although I haven't done the research, I do believe that the God who Christians we pray to was already on the continent, in inverted commas, because God is physically everywhere, but on the continent before the missionaries came. I think what they came with is their interpretation of what it looks like to worship, what church structure looks like, what distortions of the experience of the faith, and distortions of, because what Biko speaks to.
Just on that though, but the way they came about their view, it was a view with a gun, type of thing. And listen, this is our religion, and I know I'm oversimplifying it right now, but this is our religion, and this is the way it should be. And if I'm not mistaken, they basically said what we believe in is very barbaric, yeah, and it's wrong, like, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I struggle because I do think we had ways of contacting or worshipping the very same God that they claim to have brought. I think
fair enough.
What makes it incredibly hard, and this is a thing that I struggle with and I don't have the answer for, is because we had, and the thing is, you read the Bible, and in the Bible, there's this guy called the Ethiopian eunuch, right? So even within biblical times, there's parts of scripture that happen on the continent. And I think because in terms of physical books of like the physical Bible, we didn't have written documentation of our history. I do think a lot of it got lost, but I do believe that the ways in which we practice Christianity look different. And I believe that the ways in which Chinese people practice Christianity historically look different. And there were some who practiced this kind of Christianity. But yeah, so that's kind of my belief. But I grapple with the Western church and what it looks like today.
Okay.
So
if you don't mind, on just
go for it.
Not to spend too much time on this, because religion is just a whole series in itself. What's the one thing you're grappling with the Western Christian religion?
I grapple with so many things at the moment. That's why I'm trying. I'm trying to
Just
pick
name one. Name one, yeah.
So the one thing I'm grappling with, and you see this quite prevalent on the continent in different African countries, is I do think in the way the faith was taught to even the preachers and pastors who teach the faith, is that there's an overweighting in our context towards this faith of just praying and doing nothing. Towards this, so I don't believe in faith without works. I believe faith without works is dead, and faith requires work as an act of faith. And I do think one of the greatest tragedies of African, or the current way in which a lot of African churches look at Christianity, is that there's this overweighting towards, I'm just going to cry in the church for 10 hours and not do work. And I do think there's just an overweighting towards this idea of distortions of things I'm sure you've seen these things, things like take this oil and you'll get a husband next week if you take this oil. And my friend was telling me about his cousin who's a PhD holder who went to one of these conferences and was in those chats. But the extent to which that stuff has penetrated African churches is one of my grapples, because I do think the ways in which a lot of people who went to missionary schools were taught a distorted a view of Christianity, because even Steve Biko speaks to this idea that we're always taught about the Jesus who was meek and mild and not the one who turned up tables in the temple and said, why are you making a mockery of my father's house? And that's the guy that no one wants to chat about, but we want to chat about and that's where...
I mean, it's selective. I mean, it's similar to, I know speaking about religion, but how we praise Mandela, for example, but we don't speak about the womanizing Mandela and the cheating Mandela, We seem to brush it off. You're like, that's what men do or whatever, So, okay. It's a very interesting topic for me. I'm also on a journey as well. That's why I just ask, because I want to learn as well. And I wanna end it there on religion, because we will go on. I have many questions, but I don't want to ask them now. Speaking about Africa, on the more personal side, what frustrates you the most about Africans?
Wow. What frustrates me the most? It's so contentious. My response, I think our disregard for our heritage and ourselves. So this idea that everything that isn't us is good or better, and this idea that I think also we're not intentional in learning about our history and about ourselves. Because I do think we're primarily bought into everything that isn't us is better. So I'd rather buy my jeans from wherever than from my homie who I know makes jeans and is a local entrepreneur. I think it's so deeply ingrained and it's just not useful.
But is that our fault, right? Because what we taught in school, right, for example, is we taught about French philosophers, taught about American history, etc., etc. We hardly taught about our history, And the other day I was just reflecting. It's only now that I know. I'm like, the way we even touched on apartheid, it was very brief. It's like, this happened and now we're here and now we're free,
Yeah.
And even the way it's presented in a way that, black people suffered and this is what happened to them. It's never presented in a way to say, white people came and oppressed black people. It's never, the way you tell the narrative.
It's very intentional.
And how you tell it will actually form a picture, It's so, it's, I don't even know where I was going with this, because I'm just, still stuck on how we taught. Yes, mind is back. So, is it our fault, right? Number one, in terms of how we think anything that is not us is better than us.
I think in terms of the way we're taught and the amount of unlearning we have to do isn't our fault. But I also think we're not deliberate enough in our unlearning, and the choice to buy jeans from Mnoto, who sells jeans, Tepo's jeans. That's actually a real example, who sells jeans in it, because that can be good. And perhaps it's not to your taste, which is fine because you're allowed to have preferences. But I do think there is an affinity towards everything that isn't us. That's what we like. But also a sense of ownership that I think, I mean, and I haven't got it right, so that's my disclaimer, but I'm trying to
like who you're wearing right now.
Exactly, I haven't got it right. But I'm trying to really interrogate myself in, number one, firstly, mental emancipation. So actually studying about Timbuktu, which is the city of knowledge that was in Mali, that apparently a lot of incredible discoveries happened there. So being intentional about arming myself with historical identity of my people, which I think adds a weight to the way you present in the world and what you believe of yourself and your people, which I think is important.
So, just on that, like, it's a bigger question, and I like to ask these bigger questions. Where do we draw the line in terms of blaming our history? Yeah. And actually starting to do something about it. It's an overarching question to apartheid happened, and we are still feeling the effects today, you know. But I mean, when you look at politics, and they're always playing politics, it's almost like because of historical context. Granted, you know, but maybe look, I don't have the answers, but is there a point where we draw the line to say, yes, this happened, now let us rebuild?
And I think it's, again, living with...
And is it, maybe me saying this is probably from a privileged point of view as well.
Yeah. And that's the hard thing as well.
Yeah, because though I asked the question and I'm like, no, but I'm speaking from a point of privilege because, I mean, I can have this platform now. I went to a good school, have a
And I
decent
think for
job.
us, there is a line. Like for us who are privileged in a lot of ways, where, yes, we're still faced by real systematic and systemic issues, but far less than the person who, like, is living... I mean, I struggle to talk about this stuff, but then the person who's living on 1,000 rand a month and has 2 kids and is living in a shack somewhere, like...
Well, it's similar to, I mean, there's a conversation I was having with a friend in terms of saving, how we say South Africans don't save enough and people should save 10% or whatever the figure is, you know. But if you're earning 1,000 rand a month minimum wage, who are you? Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, let's look at who are the people that are saying save, right? Who are the people owning the conversation? I do not see poor people, and this is from my experience, poor people saying, yo, Sharon, listen, I know you're earning 1,000 rand a month, but save 100 rand, you know. Listen, I've never been poor, privileged in that, and I do thank my parents, and also just being lucky, you know. But I can sort of imagine, in terms of living on 1,000 rand a month, to say, don't tell me to save 100 rand. That 100 rand will get me far, you know what I mean? So, yeah, who are you to even say those things, you know? You know, I don't know. I don't have an answer. Maybe you might have an answer in terms of, overarching, we segueing, but do we draw the line somewhere?
I think we live in the duality of understanding the systemic issues, but choosing to build irrespective. Because I think it's all you can do.
Okay. So, my last question on Africa, and then we'll break for part 1. And then we'll get to know you better. And then, yeah, I think we'll close it after that. So my last question on Africa in this first part is, what is your view on, it's a 2-part question, on appropriation of African culture? Number 1, by African Americans. And number 2, just by the general public. So whether it's the West, whether it's China or Asia, sorry.
Yeah.
What is your view on that?
So
and what are the implications
Yeah.
of appropriating a culture? And is there a responsibility of the people appropriating?
I think for African Americans, personally, I have no problem with them appropriating our culture purely based on history. So their descendants are from this continent. And as someone who largely people police around, can you still say you're Ugandan if you've never lived there in your almost adolescent years or your coming of age? Can you still say you're from there? I don't think it's a fair external perspective to have on someone's heritage and lineage and etc. and the affinity that they feel. Because some African Americans feel no affinity. Then there are those who feel a deep affinity and then choose to
the motherland.
Exactly, and choose to be called Asante or whatever. So I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when culture is appropriated by people who don't have connection to the culture, then I have a very real problem with it. So for example, Caucasian people perhaps having braids or dreadlocks, which are steeped in African heritage. I think my challenge with that becomes, and this article I read put it brilliantly. And what she was explaining is an orphan with a teddy bear, right? Who has lost everything. That teddy bear may be dirty, may be torn, but it means everything to that kid because everything else has been taken away from them. And so she was trying to draw a thread from that analogy to African culture, is that because of the looting historically that's happened on the continent and how much has been taken from the continent in terms of physical resources, so mineral resources, what continues to be taken in terms of who's building our roads, etc., and where the money is actually going and all these other things, that teddy bear or that African print dress that should be nothing means everything to people who a lot of what they own has been taken from them. So in as much as you think that orphan kid, that's a dirty teddy bear and why do they care about it? I think it's very similar because all we have is the fact that braids, if you look back at, at Namibia and the history of braiding, and it's a lot more than just a hairstyle to us. And you see it as a hairstyle. And when you look at Ankara material, it's just that. But and that's my gripe with it. I just think,
okay.
I'm just not okay with it.
Okay. That was actually very powerful. The teddy bear analogy.
Yeah,
I like that. I'm going to steal that. I'm stealing that.
Absolutely.
So, you're a writer, Watch out it doesn't fall, by the way. You're a writer. So this is in your neighborhood, right? What is your view? And you are a fiction writer, right? You write novels. So what's your view on, and where I'm going with this is actually a true story of an Australian writer who was writing about Nigeria. And she wrote a fiction. And she was in a way, she was actually appropriating Nigerian culture and telling a story about a girl in Nigeria and growing up in Nigeria. And she was writing this from Australia. And her defense was that it's a fiction. So I'm just making up a story. What is your view on that?
So, I mean, it's similar to my previous statement.
Does she have a right to write about Nigeria and write a fiction book?
I struggle, to be honest. I struggle purely because of that initial analogy.
Okay.
And that, and I mean, at the moment, I'm dabbling with writing a novel about Rwanda. I haven't lived there, but I will visit it. I will stay there for some time to be able to write it, but I'll also have people from the country read it. So writers, creatives read it and vet it and tell me, is it okay? So I think there needs to be a sensitivity and a respect that often isn't found from writers like the one you mentioned, where it's just who says I can't, versus me understanding, guys, this is your history. And I'm going to read, I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to give you to read it. And when you tell me, we don't think that's fine, I'll remove it. I think there needs to be a deliberate sensitivity, which often isn't there when you don't understand what it means to the person. And that I'm just making up stuff. Because it's going to be fiction set in Rwandan history, which arguably I could just read historical books and say, because that's the backdrop, and it's a love story, but the backdrop just happens to be Rwandan history. So it's I think the value that I'm able to place on their experiences and be like, I need to respect it and I need to kind of expose myself, but also invite people in to critique the work is often not found when people don't understand the value of just a story or just a place. So just Lagos just sounds like just a city. But to Nigerians, you writing about it and not caring for what it actually is and what it means to live there and all its complexities means
And
a
yeah,
lot.
and my last point on that, and I agree with you fully. I think the implication for me is more on the, for example, if she becomes a bestseller, yes, it's fiction.
Yeah.
However, when people read about that story and that book, they will look, we humans will form an image of Nigeria,
Yeah.
and she's basically controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
And that is my biggest issue with it. And the stories we tell ourselves almost becomes our reality. So if you read that book, you'll be like, in Nigeria, is there a village? It's almost like how they used to tell the story of Africa, which is still around in terms of you have lions in your backyard.
Yeah.
You know, and it probably, who knows where it started from, but it was probably fiction, but they just bought into it. You know, I think that's my issue. And yeah, I think on that note, we can close off Africa for now. And then when we come back, I want to get to know you better. Cool. We're at my favorite part of the show. It's now becoming tradition on my show. It's actually one of the reasons why I started I Bumped Into, to have the deeper conversations. And it's basically just to get to know you better. You're already smiling. Don't be, man. And it's basically about going under the hood. I'd say. And let's see what makes Sharon Ogwang. First question. And again, feel free to answer. If you're uncomfortable, you can pass, call a friend, I don't know why I make this section so dramatic. But anyways, is there something you're holding on to that you need to let go of?
Resisting change.
Tell me more about that.
So I'm moving in September to London. And I think a part of moving is this almost like you start mourning moments and relationships even before you leave. So it's almost like I won't be here for a year, and two of my close friends are getting married, the gentleman who hosts the show and this other friend of mine, Mbesi, who I'm on another vlog with, who's marrying Putti, who's also a friend of mine.
Oh, wow.
And the idea of missing such fundamental moments in your family's lives and your friends' lives and change, and the idea of, like, it's exciting, the prospect of meeting people in this next year who could be some of my closest friends. But it feels like it's in competition currently with the current reality.
Yeah. But we can't fault you for chasing your dream, right? This is it. And if we were a good friend, we would be like, we understand, and go forth and conquer. Okay, interesting. So you're holding on to... I'm just trying to have the take out of this. You resisting change. Okay. What would you do differently if you knew no one would judge you?
It's such a good question. And I think it's not like one big thing, but it's more, I would more consistently be myself. So in a lot of like the decisions I've made in terms of the things I'm doing with my life, in terms of the way I generally live, it is in consistency with the things I'll do anyway. But I think there are moments where I cower to common groupthink and I don't say what I mean, or I laugh at something I wouldn't laugh at because I just don't think it's funny, or I like ignore a statement someone makes that I think isn't okay, and if I was being myself, I'd say I actually don't think that's okay and I don't think it's cool. So I'd more consistently be myself. I think that's the one thing I'd do if I didn't care what people thought.
Interesting. Very interesting. You watch a lot of movies?
I don't actually.
Did you used to watch a lot of movies?
Oh.
Okay.
I watch a lot of shows.
Okay, yes. You
not
watch
movies,
shows.
Yeah.
So since you watch a lot of shows, maybe you'll be able to answer this question. What genre is your life?
My life is adventure.
Okay. Tell me more about that, yeah?
Adventure.
You being the hero, of course, right?
No.
What do you mean, though?
Stop making me sound vain.
No, it's
I'm joking. It would definitely be adventure. I think I am constantly on the pursuit of adventure and the pursuit of new and novel and like, let's live all the way. Let's
like
get
that.
out of this thing having lived all the way.
live full, die empty, right?
Exactly. Like, literally, I want to live 1,000 lives, as many lives as I can in my lifetime. So adventure, and it's constantly seeking different spaces that hopefully come together into something grand, but constantly seeking out the next thing and the new thing and the thing that's consistent with who I am 3 years from now, 4 years from now.
And I think this is, again, something that resonates with you, but I'd love to know your answer with regards to this. What do you believe is true, even though you can't prove it?
Sometimes I feel like I can't prove it, but it's something in the core of my being that I feel to be true.
You believe in God being a higher?
Yes, I believe in God. And I sometimes feel like, yeah, I can't prove it, or I don't believe the evidence in front of me, but I believe it on
That's
the
when
inside.
your faith comes through, right?
Yeah, precisely.
Okay, interesting. You're a woman who lives, when we have our chats, you send me little scriptures, not Bible scriptures, but, quotes and little passages in the many books you read, But the first thing that comes to your mind, is there any quotes you live by or think of often?
At the moment,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this quote that is consistent with the thing before about being yourself. So this guy says, when you think, know, or believe, you can be a lot of other people. But when you feel, you can be no one but yourself. And that's why a lot of us don't like feeling.
Wait, shut the front door. Hold up. Wait, whoa. So just repeat that. My brain is very slow right now, yes?
When you know, when you believe, you can be a lot of other people because a lot of externalities inform that. But when you feel, no one teaches you that. You can be no one but yourself. So that's both positive feelings and negative feelings. Those are probably the moments when you're being most yourself, when you feel something in a moment. But when you think, you can be anyone. When you believe something, you can be anyone. When you know something, you can be anyone. Because there's so many thinkers who have thought the same thoughts that you think about politics, about capitalism or whatever. But in a conversation, when I feel something and I'm prompted to say something based on a feeling, I'm being myself. I'm being who I am.
And what? Okay.
And that's vulnerability in a lot of ways.
And I'm assuming you think, okay, well, being yourself, right, would you say is the most important thing, right?
I think it's the most liberating thing in the world. To live not fighting who you are. Yeah.
No one can be you but you, right?
Exactly. I think you're better.
Everyone else is taken,
Exactly.
right?
So I think you're better at the work you do. I think your successes, your failures are a lot more true. I think you're able to navigate life feeling at peace when you're not deceiving yourself.
You see, Sharon, you just take me, there's many pathways. Why do you think that people don't like being themselves or being you? Are we scared if we spend too much time with ourselves and really get to know each other? I mean, I don't want to lead you on or put thoughts, or words in your mouth, but yeah, why do you think people are afraid? And I'm generalizing right now. just based on my observation and the conversations I have with people. And I'm like, okay, you probably still need to do some self-development. Not even in a condescending way. Just, I mean, I don't know myself fully. I'm getting to know myself. But yeah, why do you think people don't know themselves?
I think it's two things. I think socialization, like if you think from when you're a kid to when you grow up, the way you're educated, the way sometimes you're raised, or the friends you have, a lot of it pushes back at the moments that you are yourself, you know what I mean? So you're told that's weird, and then you kind of have a complex about that, or you're told, why can't you just sit down like the other kids and listen to the English lesson instead of feeling like you want to sing every 2 seconds? So you're socialized to believe that there's something inherently wrong with yourself. And then I also think people are afraid because because I think it's far easier to be with the group in a lot of situations than to be alone. So to be in that room, and because of groupthink, everyone is saying one thing and you're like, no, actually, no, I'm not laughing because it's not funny to me, but probably at least 40% of the room doesn't find it funny, but it's safer in numbers than being the one person who's like, actually, it's not funny,
out, yeah.
Or being the one person that's like, I don't think that's cool. I want to go home, but everyone's hanging out at your friend's house and still laughing, and it's a vibe. And you're like, actually, guys, I'm good. I've had enough. If I'm being true, I don't feel comfortable anymore. I want to go home and just sleep, because then you're the Debbie Downer, and society
Party pooper.
Exactly, and continuously society reinforces the no. Groupthink. Oh no, be with everyone. It's safe with everyone. So over time, I think a lot of us, it's just learned behavior for humanity. It's a very deep learned behavior. And that's why I think it's one of the hardest things to learn. And I don't know if anyone can ever live a life entirely themselves, because I think society just pushes back on you in so many ways. That I don't know if it's possible to 100% of the time be yourself. I think it's possible to get to a 60, 70%, which is highly above average.
Going on to the next question. Don't worry, we're almost there. And you see, I'm light, right?
You are.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, pleasantly.
Yeah. No, because I'm in a good mood today. Sharon, what limiting belief do you have right now?
This is therapy. What limiting belief do I have right now? I do think, although it's a belief I'm trying to unlearn, I do sometimes find myself believing that my aspirations are a bit too audacious. So in as much as I publicly say them, like amongst my friends know I'll say the wildest things, but I do sometimes feel myself thinking, really? Or should you kind of security? Should you kind of go the security route, or should you go the all in, man? It's either we take the lift all the way up,
we're taking the island,
or we take it to the 8th floor. So that is a limiting belief that I do still wrestle with.
Very interesting. I mean, we read a lot about motivational speakers. I forgot his name, but he does say that if your dreams and aspirations don't scare you, then they're not big enough. So based on that, I think if it's a limiting belief, then it is a big dream, which sometimes you may have doubts, I'm assuming, right? Like, who am I to think so big, right? Okay, no, very interesting. Yeah, you didn't expect that one.
I'm actually quite impressed by the assortment of questions.
Yeah. I had to actually think about this, how I'm going to straight. But anyway, you're a reader, you're a writer, a future bestseller, New York Times top 10 list, right? Yeah. So, can you give me 3 books that everyone should read?
The Zahir by Paulo Coelho, which is a book that we both love. I think what I love about that book, and I actually want to reread it, I've read it probably twice or more than that, is it makes you look at life's simple things differently. Like take a second take. Or take a second take at a concept. Like marriage, he's 2 train tracks. and like pictures that people have of their loved ones in their home. You're just like, how do you think about that? So I like that he makes you take a second take on ordinary everyday things, but he's also just a really incredible writer. So there's Zahir by Paulo Coelho. I would say another one would be When Breath Becomes Air. I forget who the author is, but it's also just this great book about this doctor who is diagnosed with lung cancer, who's also a writer. So it's actually a true story. Who's also a writer. So he writes this book, and he talks about the idea of knowing that you're dying, and being a patient as a doctor, and it's really complex and beautiful, and the decision to have a child. So him and his wife decide to have a child, even knowing that he's dying, and it's just a really amazing book. So I'll say number 2. And number 3, one of my favorite books is Half a Yellow Sun, by Chimamanda, which is, I think, arguably one of the best historical novels. And it's specifically set in Nigeria and in the Biafra War that happened in Nigeria. And I think she does such an incredible job of telling a love story on the backdrop of such a big human tragedy, where she shows you like so many vulnerabilities about humanity, but also the redemptive qualities of humanity. And seeing that juxtaposition is breathtaking, but it's also, it's also a historical novel, but you don't feel like you're in history class. It feels like she just gets that balance so right. And even like telling you about really, like gruesome scenes, but in a way that feels tasteful and like, yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful read. So those are 3 books that I love. There's so many more. So it's hard to choose because I'd have to give you genre specific and give you 3 in each, but I try to give you a bit of an assortment there.
Which is, diversity is always good. Okay. 2 more questions. Because I thought, let me go light and probably go deep here and there, but going back to, these are 2 important questions, so I'm trying to think. Okay, I'll ask it like this. First question. What 3 lessons would you like? I'm fascinated by the number 3 for some reason. No,
it's a
but
great number.
It is. And there's a lot of psychology behind
That's
it.
what I was about to say. These studies
We read,
that
yes.
prove all that stuff.
What 3 lessons would you like to leave either the world or your children?
Wow. When you said my children, it hits home different.
So,
it hits
whilst
home
we're
different.
there, then what are 3 lessons you'd love to leave your children?
Number 1 is, Toni Morrison recently passed away, and I've been thinking about her a lot and reading her work. So she's an African-American writer, the first to win the Nobel Literature, first African-American woman in 1993. But one of the things she says, which is, yeah. So one of the things she says is, paraphrasing, I hope you always like the person in the mirror. And I hope you but the way she says it is even more beautiful. She's like, I looked in the mirror and I realized I like me. I want to sit with me and wonder what I am thinking, what I believe, and what I know. So that's one of the lessons that I hope you're always able to look in the mirror and think, I like me. And if you don't, I hope you change the things that you don't like about the person in the mirror, because you will always have you. So I hope you like you. So that's a big one that I'm currently also learning and wrestling with. The second lesson would be, I think, openness, curiosity, strong beliefs, but hold them loosely. So the idea of generosity in your engagements with people. I think you can learn so much. So don't make the things you think who you are, and feel like when people challenge them, it's a challenge on who you are versus your toolbox, which is your brain, and refine your toolbox constantly. The third lesson is people. I think when it's all said and done, It's the people you have around you, your family, your friends that matter. The people that you call about the big successes, the people that you call about the failures or the heartbreaks, people. So choose the people that you want to be surrounded by as you live this incredible adventure called your life. Kids, get those A's in school.
And my last question, and while I was just battling with this, just to close it off, I feel like it's a nice question to close it off by, because that's where we started. So it's a full circle, as they call it. We spoke about the 7-year-old you and the 16-year-old you. So would the 7-year-old and 16-year-old Sharon Ogwang be proud of you?
I think that the 7-year-old would particularly like the fact that I'm still largely playful.
Sure.
So I can be serious and deep, but I can also clown and like make fun of people, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But like
people take themselves too seriously.
Exactly, taking jabs at your close friends. I love doing that. So I think the 7-year-old would think that's really cool. I think the 16-year-old will appreciate that I finally made peace with you're just a lot of things, and that's fine. It's fine. It doesn't mean you're any less consistent or anything. It's actually fine. And I think the last thing they would both like about me is you're always trying to learn and to live true to yourself. And I think they'll both like that you haven't given up on the idea that that's possible. Yeah.
Oh. Do you have a tissue here? I'm not even like.
Are you crying, bro?
Yeah, man. Sharon, that was beautiful, and thank you for blessing me with your presence and taking the time out to also be my first video guest.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, and thank you for being vulnerable today. And I hope, you'll give me feedback afterwards. I can interview you more as you grow higher. And maybe one day I can also say, look, guys, I have a celebrity famous friend, and we did this interview, and if hopefully we can do another interview together. There's many topics we always speak about, and which is not enough for this show. From your racism, etc., from business, just general life things, our canteen conversations. As we always talk about them.
That's where it started.
But from the bottom of my heart, I do want to thank you for taking the time and sharing yourself, a piece of yourself, with the world, with the internet. You do know now this is gonna live forever, right? So you kind of gonna live forever.
We need to edit.
This is you living forever. Thank you very much, and I wish you well in your journey, especially going to London. And my parting note is go make a dent in the universe.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say, if you'd allow me, I don't know whether the host has to close these shows or what happens, but I just want to say thank you for having me on your show. And I wish you an incredible journey. I'm just glad that I get to learn all the lessons you learn, because we have calls about this all the time. But on the real, thanks for being one of my most thought-provoking friends, who challenges my thinking and forces me to consider things that I ordinarily wouldn't. Let's take the lift up to the...
And bring a jacket, right?
Of course.
Because it's going to be cold at the top.
To be...
All right.
Continued. Bye.